During the 1970s, Vivitar was a household name in photography, at least when it came to third-party lenses and accessories. It seemed like every time a new issue of your favorite photo magazine was released, so was a new lens. Basically, if you spent all your money on the camera body and wanted a decent lens without paying a crazy amount, one solution was Vivitar. You may scoff at third-party lenses, and I definitely have. I've come across a lot and passed on most, but this lens I couldn't resist because it was immaculate and came with the original box and manual. But really, how good are these old Vivitar lenses? Hi everyone, Azriel Knight here, and today I'm reviewing the Vivitar 75-205 close focusing telephoto lens. The Vivitar 75-205 f3.8 telephoto lens was advertised in the March 1977 issue of Popular Photography. The ad claimed there were 5 good reasons for owning it. The reasons included a light and compact design and that it would replace several prime lenses. Sounds like a bit of a stretch on both accounts, especially all these years later. They also promised superb sharpness that even fussy pros would applaud. Because it's been over 40 years since these were made, it will be hard to gauge what the quality was like at the time. The examples in the ad use studio lighting, which will showcase its abilities in the best possible circumstances as well. The quality of even some of the more expensive lenses at the time varied enough that professionals, and I'm assuming some enthusiasts, would sample multiple lenses for the sharpest copy before opening their wallets. With all that being said, if there are some aspects of the lens quality displayed here in this video that you like or dislike, at least some of it may just be my copy. Here's what's the same for all of them though. The maximum aperture is f3.8 across the board, which is fantastic. A lot of the time when buying a budget lens, you're gonna end up with a smaller aperture while zoomed than when fully wide. Other cheap zoom lenses have a push-pull method to the zoom, which sucks dust into the lens over time. I prefer what they have done here using a twist method, just like focusing, though it's not perfect, and I'll tell you why in a bit. The Vivitar 75-205 weighs 787 grams or 28 ounces and is 6 inches or 153 millimeters long with a diameter of 67 millimeters or 2.6 inches. Actually, that's pretty compact, but it still has some heft to it. The minimum focusing distance was impressive at just 14 3/4 inches or 37.5 centimeters from the focal plane when in close focusing mode. You can get in pretty tight, and switching to close-up gives you larger-than-life results. My version of this lens is for the Canon FL and FD mounts, so I used it on a Canon AE-1 that I also needed to test. When released, the 75-205 was available for Nikon, Nichromat, Canon, Minolta, Konica, Olympus OM, Pentax S, and of course, Vivitar cameras, not to mention the universal thread mounts. Remember though, the lens doesn't work on all of them at once. Each version has the mount built into it, otherwise I'd have used it on my Nikon. So while shopping for one, make sure you include the mount type in your search. Like I mentioned, mine came with the box and manual. I got it from the original owner a few years back at a garage sale, and it looks like he bought it from a Super S Drugs for $289.99 Canadian. A hefty price, and I'm guessing he bought it at least fairly new as there's no barcode to be found. I'm going to give you my personal pros and cons as well as a few tips, but first, here are my favorite photos taken with the Vivitar 75-205 close focusing telephoto lens. I hope you enjoyed those. This time around, it was important for me to shoot color and black and white, and I'm glad I did. Okay, let's talk pros and cons. First, the pros. Pro number one I mentioned already, but it's the consistent 3.8 max aperture. It's one less thing to think about and usually a sign of quality. Pro number two is the close focus option, which is really easy to set. All you need to do is keep rotating. Other lenses like my main Nikon requires a switch and needs to be a certain focal length to engage and disengage. And now the cons. Con number one is the amount of twisting required to get from 75 to 205. If you're holding the camera up to your eye, it takes a couple of twists to get from one end to the other. Con number two is the front of the lens rotates while focusing. This is fine until you have a linear or circular polarizer, which will rotate with the focus. If you just grabbed one of these or are still interested in one, I have a few tips for you. Tip number one is get in the habit of zooming with the camera rather than the lens. Zooming at eye level is slow and a little clumsy for me. I just lower the camera, crank it, and raise it back to my eye and then fine tune as needed. Tip number two is focus first before adjusting your polarizing filter. By the way, it has a 58mm thread. And tip number three is that the Konica mount only goes to f/16. And those are my tips. I hope it helped you make a more informed decision. This is made to be a practical guide. Things like which aperture has the best sharpness, bokeh balls, color rendering don't play into my final decision on whether or not I like a lens. Like I mentioned earlier, even if I did, the quality will vary from lens to lens and probably mount to mount, as they were just pumping these out to consumers as fast as possible. That's why you still see so many of them in the wild. The other truth here is that if you care about those things, you probably shouldn't shop for a Vivitar. And that's all for now. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, perhaps consider supporting me on Patreon. You can also follow me on Instagram and Twitter, and until next time, stay classic.